to introduce me. Over the past 2 years, I wrote a book called Generation Jobless that specifically looks at this intersection and showcases many solutions. So if somebody could please go to the next slide, because I don't have access. Thank you. So youth unemployment, as we all know, is one of the biggest issues we have at the current time, predominantly in the developed world, but also in the developing world alike. If we look at statistics, the Middle East and Northern African region, among other regions, are hardest hit. Next slide, please. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So here are a few indications of the youth unemployment issue. So we have roughly 1.2 billion young people worldwide, and young is the OECD ILO definition 15 to 24, which makes up 70% of the total population of the world. What is interesting and sad at the same time is that there are 75 million unemployed, officially unemployed young individuals, which actually makes up 40% of the total unemployed population. So you can already see that there is a first big gap between population versus unemployment. But if we look at it in a more differentiated way, actually, those 75 million are actually only those registered employed. So if we look at the informal economy, if we look at the needs, so the neither in employment, education, or training, those individuals actually add up to the numbers, but we don't really have proper numbers. You see on the right that for the region of Latin America, I managed to get some insights into those numbers. So you see there are 10 million unemployed young people, 22 million needs, so neither in employment or education or training, and 30 million that are in informality. So out of those 106 million young people, we have roughly 16 million that fall into either one of these categories. So youth unemployment itself really forms the tip of the iceberg. Next slide, please. So if we look at the youth unemployment issue, we really have to look at things in a more differentiated way, right? Everybody, media, organizations, they typically look at youth unemployment rate. But what we saw is that if we look at other indicators as well, such as the youth to adult unemployment ratio, the needs rate, all these different indicators that collectively contribute to providing us with some insight into the crisis, we see different pictures, and we can actually start targeting our solutions to the specific region. So what we can see on this slide here is actually, I mapped the youth versus the adult unemployment rate, and basically what you can see here, in the case of Europe, we typically speak about Greece and Spain having really high unemployment rates, but what is interesting is that if we map these two indicators, some other countries pop up like Sweden, Norway, Italy, UK, New Zealand that are not on our radar actually, and basically, they provide us with some insights regarding a mismatch between labor market for young people and labor market for more senior people. So I have a question that came in from Lindsay. Are these all the most recent stats from the ILO? Those numbers, as you can see on the bottom right, ILO, OECD, they're all taken from 2013. There has been some slight improvements with regards to overall youth unemployment rates in 2014 and 15. So in 13, we clearly had the peak, at least in Europe and other regions, it's still continuing. Next slide, please. What we see here is actually over the course of the crisis, the youth to adult unemployment ratio and how it progressed. And you see that in some regions it went up quite a bit, and overall, as an aggregate number, it went up as well. For the OECD average is roughly 3. So we can say that on a cohort basis, on every unemployed adult, we have 3 unemployed young individuals. Next slide. So if we talk about the drivers of the crisis, before we talk about solutions, we need to understand the drivers, right? Because the solutions ultimately need to be customized to the region, to the country, and so we need to understand the drivers. So typically what we discuss is supply-side drivers and demand-side drivers. So and we typically talk about factors like lack of preparedness for work. So we're talking about skills and experiences that might not be just there yet in order to be fully useful to the labor market. Academic inflation, that's something where we see that more and more young people are running towards universities, which is particularly worrisome in countries such as Germany, Austria, Switzerland, where we have very strong vocational training. We have this dual education system, but more and more young people are running into the tertiary education stream, which in itself is not bad, but it's bad because the economy simply needs non-academic workers as well. We're talking about characteristics, the attitudes towards work, so the generation Y, millennials, digital natives, characteristics, which I will talk about in a second, and overall false expectations. From the demand side, of course, we have the cyclical demand issues, overall low aggregate demand in a region or a country, the inflexibility that of the labor market, and more young people being forced and pushed into temporary employment. Many of the recruiting channels not being accessible to young people, and of course the expectations again. So, and ultimately, in conclusion, there are the mismatch issues, right? We have what we all hear, what we always discuss, the skills, capabilities mismatch between what young people have when they come to the labor market and what the labor market requires, and the expectations mismatch. Next slide. You can skip this slide. It's basically just one word on this one. It's basically just showing that there has been some major generational evolution of the past century, and while there has been more of an evolutionary generational development since the end of the Second World, the introduction of the Internet, where there have been a few changes, but not major changes, but really these revolutionary changes towards the digital natives that have grown up in this digital era, and that's where we really see a change in characteristics, a change in behavior, a change in work style, work ethics, and ultimately this is something that influences entire societies and the workforce and the labor market. So you know, that's where employers need to adapt themselves as well in order to be ready for this generation to enter the job market. Next slide, please. So if we talk about digital natives, we need to, of course, understand who are they and what do they want when they graduate, when they come onto the labor market. And some of the characteristics are related to the factors that you see here. Internet, because of things like Twitter, WhatsApp, email, everything is happening fast, and you know, if we talk about promotion in the workforce, for example, that's something that factors in here, where the whole labor market needs to adapt to much quicker feedback cycles. We see a shift of basic skills where we move from handwriting to computer writing, from going to a library and getting a book to study to studying on an iPad. Good or bad, not judging about it, just observing that there are shifts. Privacy, we all know, of course, that people are less and less concerned about sharing some private things on the web. There's a counter movement, but generally speaking, I guess people are more open than, let's say, 40, 50 years ago. The virtual life element, virtual dating, virtual meeting, virtual interactions, everything virtual, remote work, that's something that factors in here as well, and of course the expectation level from young people also towards the labor market when they enter the labor market that they say, hey, we want to work from home, we want to work flexibly, part-time maybe, and so on. Education, the value of education, and that would be something interesting to discuss later with all of you, is regarded as less valuable than, let's say, 40, 50 years ago. I would argue that for the baby boomers and Generation X, that education has much greater value than it does today. All the opportunities for young people to study online and gain the skills that they need to do whatever they need to do. Next slide, please. So the question is, because of course we're talking about solutions, right? What if we do not find adequate solutions? What if we cannot tackle this issue quick enough in order to alleviate the problem for the young people? And broadly speaking, without going into all the details, we can really say that there are major societal and economic consequences that we can talk about, and at the same time individual consequences. So on the young person, we all know that the scarring effects of unemployment in the young person are much worse than later on in life. Lifelong effects in terms of earnings, in terms of healthiness, well-being, etc. And of course, on a societal economic level, we waste a lot of potential. We're at risk that we educate young people and then they leave the country to go somewhere else to work. So all of the taxpayers' money that went into education is leaving the country, creating value somewhere else in the end. Just below, there's a statistic showing that estimating that basically joblessness in the United States alone will account for a total of 20 billion in lost earnings over the next 10 years. That's an estimate. Total joblessness, not just young people, but I think this is a quite impressive number. Next slide, please. So let's move on to the solutions, because that's, I think, why we're here in the end. I look at all these different stakeholder groups that you see here on this slide, and two core stakeholder groups, and those that we actually want to discuss today are the educators, so the education system, and then the employers, so the labor market side. Among others, of course, are the young people, the policymakers, the family members, etc. But let's focus really on those two. Next slide, please. And the interesting thing really at this intersection of the education system and the labor market is we did a study with the Futurist Forum a few years ago where we questioned 50,000 students all across Europe, asking them how useful they would take career service at their university, or if they have one, and if they have one, if they find it useful. And interestingly, it was quite shocking, the result that basically 75% of the universities or of the students were not satisfied, would wish to have one, or if they have one, wish to have a better one. And I think this is a clear indication of where many tertiary education institutions still felt at basically covering their, in my perspective, second most important mandate besides transferring knowledge to young people, which is actually getting them ready for the next stage in life. Next slide, please. So, in the end, if we there's a clear mismatch in the sense that from the supply side, in Europe, in the EU, we have 6 million unemployed young individuals that are employable, that are qualified, but they can't find a job. And on the demand side, there are jobs. So, obviously there's something not right in the sense that we somehow don't manage to bring together those individuals and those opportunities, or maybe they just don't fit and we just made a mistake in training them in the wrong things. The question is, what can we specifically do to right this wrong? Next slide. So what I want to do now is to introduce the two panelists that will discuss with me those questions and what can happen at this intersection. So on the one side, there's Michelle Blanchett. She's an entrepreneur. She's the founder and director of the Educators Lab. She has been speaking at many conferences. She contributed to the book. She was the leader of Chapter 5, basically, which discusses exactly this intersection. So she's a true expert on the education system. She's also part of the World Economic Forum Shapers Initiative and has been speaking at TEDx Lausanne. Then there's Carsten Schutthoff. He's the founder and CEO of the Circular Society. He will say a few words about it. One of their projects is the European Youth Employment Project, which is a very inspiring initiative trying to take unemployed individuals and re-skill them to make them ready for the labor market. He has worked as the Chief Human Resource Officer of the World Economic Forum. He co-founded the International HR Community in Switzerland and has been speaking at dozens and dozens of conferences, international conferences, so he's a very well-known individual. So I'm super happy that both of them are here, and I will pass on the microphone to Michelle now to give her perspective on things before we discuss the discussion.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me before I start?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. So I'm here to talk about what education providers can do to help youth transition from school to work. Hold on, I'm just kidding. Okay, yes. So this is a really big topic, and I'm going to try to narrow it down as best as I can. So excuse me if I don't get too specific on certain things. But before we really get into what we can do, these I feel are a few of the big barriers that prevent us from even addressing this issue. So as education providers, number one is awareness. So how many educators are really aware of the youth unemployment issue, of the skills mismatch issue? And if they are aware, how many of them actually know which skills employers are looking for or what to do about it? And I feel this is a huge problem. Number two is engagement. We have a lot of initiatives to help alleviate youth unemployment, but I'm not sure how involved educators actually are in the process, and this can cause things to not really reach students at the most basic level. And then finally, this is a big problem that's not just a university problem. A lot of times when I read literature, hear discussions on the skills mismatch, people tend to focus at students at the college level. But really, this is something that starts early. It starts in K through 12, because as Peter showed in his last slides, you have so many students that are disengaged, that aren't studying, and these are the students that are more likely to fall in the youth unemployment category. So, but once those things have kind of been addressed, there's four main things I think that schools and universities can really focus on to help tackle youth unemployment, and they're listed here. So career readiness, making sure that young people are ready to go into the job market, that they have the tools and know how to get a job, that you inspire them to be lifelong learners because they're more able to adapt to a changing job market, that they have skills and they know how to obtain skills, and then finally that they're engaged, because if students aren't engaged, they're more likely to leave the school system, they're more likely to not get jobs. So I've kind of divided this. So the first two slides, so I'm actually going to talk now about what education providers can do. And I've divided this. So the first two slides talk about what schools and universities can do internally. And of course, the first thing is just change what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. Fortunately, there's a lot going on in this space right now. We're seeing new curriculums being developed all over the world that focus on 21st century skills, or sustainability or leadership, etc. And these, I think, are beneficial because they promote the tools we just discussed. There's new pedagogies. There is definitely a push towards more hands-on experimental learning, and we're seeing this in a lot of classrooms. New tools and resources, technology being the most obvious. And these changes are really helping to for the classroom to be adapted to today's market so students are more engaged, more career ready, and building skills. Another thing that can happen within schools is they can try to create a culture of innovation, because an important component of fixing something like youth unemployment is mindset. So we don't want students anymore to just be job seekers. We'd like them to also be job creators. And in order for this to happen, schools and universities need to make sure they offer a space where students can practice like they play. So are there opportunities for students to personalize their learning? There's a lot of dynamic programs out there. I see a lot of social enterprises and NGOs with programs on entrepreneurship or leadership, creativity, etc. Our students, do they have access to this? And then finally, actually providing outlets within the school for students to innovate. So are there maker spaces? Is there an innovation lab? Is the library being utilized in a dynamic way so students have more digital literacy? So these two things are really big. We're seeing this happen in schools, but it's a matter of also seeing what's working the best and spreading and kind of saying what's working in schools on a day-to-day basis that are helping to alleviate things like youth unemployment in certain schools and communities. The second two slides I'll focus on, these have to do more with external outreach, what schools and universities can do to partner with other stakeholders. So it's really important that that education providers try to create an ecosystem. And I put here collaborative frameworks. It's really, really important that we work together, because as I said, with awareness and engagement, how are we communicating? Like, are educators and employers communicating? There was a Think Young survey, and they actually found that a lot of students had never heard a lot of the programs that are available to them. So how do we bridge this gap? And so creating these sort of collaborative frameworks is really essential in alleviating this issue. And just to give an example of two things that we could probably do a better job of, we're starting to see community hackathons in different cities or different communities, and it's kind of a local way to bring different stakeholders together to get the community to work on issues like youth unemployment. And that also gives a chance for employers and government officials, parents, teachers, etc., to be in the same room together and talk about actual solutions. And then you also have your career services department. And I don't just mean at a university level. Also, if you think about just K-12, in the US, I think it's between 35–40% of students go to college. What about everybody else? Do they have, if you're in high school, do you have a counselor that you can go to who will actually help you kind of find options? Who knows about government programs or apprenticeships or whatever that you can take on if you don't want to go to college? Because a lot of time, especially at the lower grades, if you go to see a counselor, it's because it's assumed you're going to go to university. So this is something where a career services department could really help fill this gap. And then finally, creating new outlets, and this might be more at a policy level, but really thinking about, on a macro scale, is university the only way for students to succeed? How do we enable students to get credentials? Is there a way to provide more vocational outlets for our students? There's nothing wrong with doing the VOTEC route, and I feel like sometimes this is kind of stigmatized in certain countries. But this would be a great way to enable our young people to gain employment. What e-learning opportunities are available to students? This would enable them to personalize their learning, to perhaps get credentials for something that they're actually interested in that maybe isn't available at their school. Apprenticeships, how do students learn about them, have access to them, so that they get the hands-on experience they need so that they can obtain a job. And these are just things we really need to think about so that we can enable more students to succeed. And just to kind of wrap up, sorry. So we have kind of our tools. We know that we need youth to be career ready, to have skills, lifelong learners, to be engaged, etc. So just to kind of wrap up, what can education providers do? Well, they can change a few things internally, make sure their practices are most suitable to get the outcomes I just listed, and they can also do more to encourage innovation. And then on the other end, there's a lot of external outreach that needs to happen. How can they make synergies with other stakeholders? And then how can we also create new outlets so that all students can succeed, can have a job, can have a quality of life? And I think I'm going to wrap up there.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thanks, Michelle.
Hey, Peter, do you want to say something, or shall I
Let me
go?
pass over the word now to Carsten, the director
Peter?
of the Circular Society. Yeah, go ahead.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, hang on just a moment. Peter, is that okay if I just continue now? I guess you might have some technical issues again. Yeah. Good morning and good afternoon or good evening, everybody, wherever you might be. I'm really excited to... Oh, Peter, you're back? Peter?
I was here, but did you hear me?
Nope. Now I hear you.
Hello?
Anyway, I think I'll continue. So I'm really excited to be given the chance to speak to you today and to learn and exchange ideas with you on a topic that is very dear to my heart. As Peter introduced our activity, our project, we call it the European Youth Employment, or the EYE certificate. Actually, the abbreviation EYE, if you read it out, it spells out I, because we believe that society shouldn't turn a blind eye to the 6 million unemployed young people in Europe. So picking up on Peter's comment on the multi-stakeholder, let me just move to my next slide. We realized when we looked into this field of youth unemployment that this is truly challenging. It is challenging on so many levels, and it's challenging the sustainability of businesses and society. And the thing is, it is far too complex to be solved by any one of us alone. No one single leader, no one single company, no one single industry or one single country alone can solve this problem. We need to realize that we are actually in this together. Now, obviously, over the past many years, there have been several attempts to solve youth unemployment from a political or from a philanthropic point of view. But we believe that these approaches, the tools that have been used, have not really produced real satisfactory results for several reasons which I don't want to go into. We have decided to take a different approach. And so what we decided to do is we wanted to see if it is possible to unleash the power of business and see whether we can turn an otherwise social problem like youth unemployment into a really attractive business opportunity for all members of what we call impact community. So that's the why we do it. Now, what is it we do? Well, first of all, we back on what Peter said. There's a significant skills gap in Europe. I'm going to zoom in on Europe only. Now, if you look at some of the studies that Peter has not mentioned yet, for instance, the McKinsey study, Education to Employment, they say that up to 60% of the surveyed employers in Europe say, well, I have a job and I would like to offer a job to young people. Young candidates that I find, they don't have the right skills, so I don't hire them. At the same time, we know that there's a whole bunch of vacancies existing across Europe. Peter mentioned the number. And of course, the vacancies are not good for anybody. They're not good for the unemployed, but they're also not good for the companies. And ultimately, they're also not good for society because actually we're depriving ourselves from growth potential. So we decided that maybe there's a possibility to add value to society, to business, and to individuals by trying to fix the skills gap. And that's what we do in our EYE certificate, which actually, as we speak, we're launching in Portugal. So we have decided to work on 15 of the key skills that McKinsey or the European Commission or others keep on requesting. For instance, collaboration, critical thinking, problem solving, English language skill, presentation skills, and so on. So what we do is we train young people after we have understood from employers in our impact community what they are looking for. So we have a very close connection to employers, and we understand what types of skills or what types of people they're looking for their job. Then we use our extended network on the supply side, as Peter called it. So the supply side, for instance, in Portugal, includes a whole bunch of different universities, the Nova School of Business, the Polytechnic, the ATEC, Vocational Education School, and so on. It also includes organizations such as ISEC, which some of you might know as the world's largest student-run organization. So all these organizations help us reach out to young people in their network. Of course, not all of them are unemployed, but some of them are unemployed. And just recently, we had the city of Setúbal join forces with us. Setúbal is a city about 30 kilometers south of Lisbon, 250,000 people. So the city has now also endorsed program, and they are also reaching out to the many thousands of young people that are looking for jobs in Setúbal and the vicinity. So we select these young people through a straightforward recruitment or selection process. And then we bring them into a 6-month training program where we teach these 15 skills that I mentioned before: self-leadership, critical thinking, creativity, project management, some IT skills, and so on and so on. Some of these workshops are live or physical. That means they take place in a classroom. Some of them are virtual. We have teamed up with a company called Education First, which is the world's largest language school. They have about 35,000 people. And they offer a role model online English program that they typically sell to organizations like, I don't know, ABB or other big suppliers. In this case, they actually provide it to the unemployed people in our network. So we train a lot of soft skills and competencies, but what we also do is we provide our participants with internship opportunities. And if you remember what Peter said before, the internship, or the fact that young people lack professional experience, is one of those big hurdles for them to actually land a full-time job, which is kind of strange, because on the one hand, the companies criticize young people for not having professional experience. On the other hand, it's only those companies that could provide these opportunities. So actually, we want to help bridge that gap. So we offer internships between 4 and 5 months with employers in our network. And at the end of the program, the same employers who have offered the internship, or the same employers who actually are active in our network, or other multipliers like large HR providers like Kelly Services that you might know. They're similar to Manpower or to Adecco and others. So via the employers or our multipliers, we then provide employment opportunities to the graduates of our program. So none of this is possible just because of any one individual. This only works because we all come together as part of the impact community. So we are kind of using this collaborative mindset of the next generation. We bring employers together with trainers, together with city councils, together with universities and individuals, and together we aspire to achieve this result that none of us alone can do. And my last slide, just to show you, this is the how we do it. I said a bit about that one. So we work on the right-hand side of the slide. See the 3 boxes: jobs, candidates, and trainings. So on the job side, we have several companies, associations, and multipliers that help us get access to vacancies and help us understand the needs of employers. Under the candidate box, you see some of the organizations that help us find candidates. And then under the training box, you see some of those institutions that help us provide the necessary skills and competency training. And the more members this impact community brings together, the more impactful it is. We are starting with 30 young people in Portugal. Our aim is to actually impact 50,000 people by the end of 2018. I can't do this by myself. You can't do this by yourself. Nobody can do this by themselves. We have to work on this together because it should be, and it is, in everybody's interest. Last slide. Just quickly, we want to start in September, end of September. So we're in the hiring process of the young people now. The training will take place between September, and the internship will be running November and, let's say, end of January. There's a final workshop in the end of January, followed by a graduation. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments, and even better recommendations how to do it even better. And if you want to join us, please feel welcome to do so. Thank you. Hello? Hello?
To touch upon, which I think the three of us discussed actually is this whole skills topic and competencies topic.
I can't hear anybody anymore.
We know that there's something going on, and that the education system itself is not 100% correctly adjusted to educate people for the labor market. So, Michelle, maybe a question targeted. Should we, maybe based on the example some of you might have heard in Finland, they're getting rid of subjects and replacing subjects with competencies and skills transmitted in whatever subject that is being taught, but the subject connotation does not exist anymore or will not exist anymore. Is this the right approach to take to focus education rather on skills and competencies instead of math and biology, and rather think about problem solving and creativity and the ability of telescoping, looking in very deep and zooming out and having the big picture and these things? Do you think, Michelle, that this is the right approach? That's also the approach taken by Charles Fidel out of Boston. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think there's actually a big emphasis away from content in a lot of places and more on skills, because regardless of what subject you have, there's a way to focus on skills. So problem solving, critical thinking, like social emotional learning. If these are the things that people are asking for, digital literacy, it doesn't really matter what the subject is. So we're seeing a lot of people kind of play around with different sort of curriculums, and I think it is sort of the future. So yeah, Finland's been able to do this, and we'll see how that goes. But we're also seeing, especially more in the developing world, there's a bit more flexibility with the curriculum. So you're seeing, just to name off two examples, I recently talked with someone from Better World Education and then someone else from Edge Makers. And both of these organizations are trying to offer 21st century relevant curriculums that incorporate a lot of skill building and hands-on learning. And we're seeing a trend, I would say, kind of in this, in which you can see if these work better to get young people jobs. The problem is just, it seems it's very hard to innovate in more developed countries because there are so many mandates and there is such a rigid curriculum that sometimes this prevents educators from focusing on skills. Yeah, I would say hopefully this can be alleviated a bit, and we'll see what happens with some of these countries and even communities that are able to play around with these more dynamic sort of curriculums that do focus on skills. Hello?
Hello?
Hello, did everyone hear me?
I heard you, Michelle, but I can't hear Peter.
I can't hear Peter either.
Hello?
Huh.
Can you hear me? I'm here.
Okay, Peter, now you're there.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay, so a question to Carsten. You were discussing the business case for the different stakeholders, and I believe that this is quite critical in solving the youth unemployment issue, predominantly when it comes to employers. We need to showcase them that there is a business case behind hiring young people. That's also one of the big topics I discuss in the book. What's your perspective if we maybe focus on the employer side and maybe more difficult the education side, because you hardly ever talk about a business case in the education space, but what would be a business case for educators, but also, of course, employers, in order to get them active and motivated into solving youth unemployment?
Okay, thank you, Peter. Can you hear me, everybody?
I can.
Yeah. Okay. So what we found is that there is no one single business case that fits all needs of all stakeholders in our impact community. So a university might be driven by other reasons as a employer, and that might be again a different reason than a company like Kelly Services to join us. And that might be a different reason than what drives a trainer or multiplier or coach to join the impact community. So what we have decided to do is to be very individualistic when it comes to designing and developing business propositions for the various companies and organizations in our network. I'll give you a couple of examples. And I'll start with education, Peter, because that's what you asked me to do, is to start with. So we work with an organization called ATEC, which is Portugal's leading vocational education school. So they train about 1,200 car mechanics, mechanical engineers, and IT engineers per year. And some of those people, of course, after graduation, become unemployed. Now, ATEC is intrinsically motivated to get, of course, everybody from their classrooms into a job. Otherwise, basically, the work that they have done, the training that they have done, has missed its their our trainers currently cannot do. So they are already there. You see that there's a hybrid. On the one hand, they're interested to get their young people, their graduates, into employment, and on the other hand, actually they see this as a business opportunity for themselves. Now let's contrast this with, let's say, an organization such as the World YMCA. Most of you will know the YMCA, not just because of the 1970s song, but also because of the organization that is behind it. It's about 100,000 people, 100,000 staff organization. They have 66 million members and about 1,000 locations around the world. They're all about youth. It's no longer about young men. It's no longer about young men who are Christians. Actually, it's a global organization, but they're about young people, no matter the religion, no matter the race. So their mission is to help young people, and they actually work with us because they see a potential with us and through us to scale their own mission. We work with them in a partnership to basically use their amenities. For instance, in Setúbal, south of Lisbon, we have now started another Circular Society Center at the CA in Setúbal, where we are training our participants. And a third example might be a company like Education First that I mentioned before. So they typically would sell their highly developed training programs, so language. But through
anymore. Hello? Hello?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
The connection is really bad. I can't really hear anything. Does anybody hear me, or? Okay, somehow it's weird. Okay, fine. So let's proceed with the questions that we got from the audience, because the discussion was quite active, and I think we actually create some sort of a forum afterwards, because I think within the time we have now, we really cannot address all the points, and I think there's a lot we have to and should. So I hope we can figure out some sort of a way to have an ongoing discussion forum where we can exchange ideas and thoughts. I would be really happy to keep discussing with all of you, because I'm sure that we can all learn from each other, and you know, all the material, I hope it will be shared with all of you, and let's keep interacting. It can maybe be a LinkedIn group or something, but let's continue to some of the questions that we have. There was one question that came in from, let me see, from Rob. He said, Peter mentioned in his earlier slides that attitudes and behaviors on the supply side are a barrier to youth employment. Carsten alluded to some of this in the EYE program he mentioned. And what is the role of the education system in addressing those attitudes and behaviors? I can maybe briefly say a word or two on this, and then Michelle and Carsten can comment as well. So evidently, the education system, but not just education in the classical sense, but education starts at home, right? It also actually it starts at home with the parents and how they educate you, but of course also in primary school, secondary school, university. That's where an individual forms his or her attitudes and behaviors, and the way he or she addresses problems in life in the greater sense. And so, you know, the education system in the broadest sense is really the most responsible, the primary responsible entity in order to make sure that young people have the right attitude towards work. That starts with elements such as loyalty. One thing that we see a lot and on the labor market is that young people are much less loyal to their employers than, let's say, 30, 40 years ago, or previous generations as such. So, you know, there are these kind of estimations that people that enter the labor market now are likely to have 20 to 30 jobs before they retire. So from an economic perspective, you know, if you look at young people entering the world of work with a lack of skills, so that the employer actually needs to train the young person on the job first. So it's an investment. It's not a return on investment yet for the employer. Going through training 1 to 2 years, and then on average after 3 years, this young person quits the job again. The period during which this young individual can create economic value to a company is much shorter than it was, say, 10 years ago, which is also why many employers say, why should I hire young people? I have to train them first, and then 3 years later they leave again, possibly even stealing some of our confidential information. So I think that's one of the core issues we really need to tackle, is the attitude, and that's exactly to your point, Rob. The attitude towards work, the attitude towards employers. I think this is really a core element. Michelle, Carsten, do you want to add something? No? I got the message that we have to wrap up due to time issues, but Sarah, maybe you want to comment very quickly on how this can continue, because I think there's a lot going on in terms of discussions, and I think it would be a pity not to use the opportunity to keep up the conversation. So I can only encourage each one of you to reach out to me and also to Michelle and Carsten, of course, directly to chat, and maybe there are opportunities to work together. You will find my details in the slides. I also negotiated a discount for the webinar participants for the book, so you will see that in the slides when they're shared with you. But please reach out to me. I would be happy to discuss, keep discussing with you on the topic. And Sarah, maybe you guys can figure out a way to keep going on the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Peter, and thanks so much for offering the discount for participants as well. So we will be sending out an email after this with not only a link to the recording and some of the resources, but also suggestions for how we can keep the conversation going. Because I agree, there are a lot of really good questions and good discussions in the chat box that need to be addressed. So thank you, Peter, Michelle, and Karsten for really contributing your expertise and your experience on this topic. Another forum where we'll be continuing this conversation is at the Global Youth Economic Opportunities Summit, which is taking place in Washington, D.C. this fall, October 6th through 8th. So you can find out more information online at www.youtheosummit.org. In addition to the resources and the webinar recording that you'll receive in the email, we also take me very seriously at making sense and trying to evaluate how well we do with our learning events, both in terms of content and delivery. So after this webinar, we would very much appreciate you taking 2 minutes to complete that evaluation. And again, we'll be sending out all of the notes, all the resources, and ways to continue the conversation via email later today. Thank you again for your participation, and to our speakers. Please let me know if you're interested in joining by blogging or
thank you very much. From my side, I had a really good time. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Karsten, for participating. And thank you, everybody, for participating in the webinar. And I really look forward to reading an email or a LinkedIn connection or tweet from you.
Great. Well, thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your week.